Welcome to On the Way Classroom with Tony Crisp. Each weekday, Monday through Friday, Dr. Crisp will teach the Bible from its historical, geographical, linguistic, and cultural context. Tune in daily to start your day right and to deepen your understanding of how to better walk the way and enjoy the journey. Now, here's your host, Dr. Tony Crisp.
Welcome to On the Way Classroom. I'm so glad that you're with us today. And if you were not with us in our last session, I want to just review and get you up to date. We have been studying the four Gospels. That is just an overview of the New Testament in general, but the Gospel specifically. And in our last session, we started through the Gospel of Matthew, which is the Gospel of the King, of the Messiah, and His kingdom. And we started at chapter 1 and verse 1 and looked at Abraham and David as the two most important people in the entire Old Testament related to salvation, simply because they are the two men to whom God made unconditional covenants. Now, an unconditional covenant doesn't have the word if in it. That is a conditional particle. In other words, the Mosaic covenant, to give you a contrast, is a conditional covenant. God said, because you do this, I will do this. If you live this way, I will bless you. If you live that way, I will curse you. And you can read about that in the Torah. The Mosaic covenant is a conditional covenant. The land covenant and the people of Israel enjoying the land and being able to stay in the land was a condition based upon their obedience and God's favor upon them. But to David and to Abraham were given unconditional covenants. That is, God said, I'm going to do what I'm going to do and act in a way toward you, not on the basis of who you are, but on the basis of who I am and what I have chosen to do. And so we came to the Gospel of Matthew with that first chapter and first verse. But when I left you the last session, we were in Bethlehem with the wise men. Yes, the wise men. And I had started through the first verse of the Gospel of Matthew chapter 2. Now, just by way of review, I had urged those who have nativity scenes and are doing Christmas plays that show the Magi, the wise men as we call them, coming from the east, all dressed in their prettier bathrobes and crowns on their head. They came to the same stable and were there with the shepherds. Well, the reality is that's not what the Gospels say. It doesn't say that in the Gospel of Luke. It doesn't say that in the Gospel of John. It doesn't say that, of course, in the Gospel of Mark. And it doesn't say that in the Gospel of Matthew. The wise men who came from the east would have been more than likely a large entourage, a caravan. You would not have three men carrying gold, frankincense, and myrrh, these costly special goods, and dignitaries as they would have been, coming with just the three of them. They would have had a large entourage with them. This is why it gathered the attention and caught the attention of Herod the king over all of the realm, which is called Israel today. And he was in charge. He was granted that title by the Roman Caesar. And so he was jealous. If you don't know anything about Herod the Great, he was a paranoid schizophrenic. He was a man who was maniacal. He killed his own family. He killed his children. He killed his wives. He was a maniac. And so Herod was paranoid, and when they came and he saw this entourage, he said, hey, I don't know where he was born, because they asked, where is he who was born King of the Jews? And so they searched all of the records, and they found out it would have been Bethlehem, because these magi were just following a star. And they had seen it in the east, and now they had followed it, and it came and stood over the place where the child was. And I talked about how that in the Gospel of Luke, the babe, the word baby that is translated baby in the Gospel of Luke is the word brephos. It's the word for an infant, one a newborn, or one that's still held in the arms, still feeding. And the word that is in the Gospel of Matthew is the word padion, which usually refers to a toddler or above. It can be a baby, but not in the sense of brephos. It is most of the time translated as one who is a toddler or a child, and sometimes it's used even for a teenager, but not a lot. And so I'm just telling you that this was later. One of the reasons why I believe that Herod killed all of the babies in the environs of Bethlehem and Ephratah was he went 6 months beyond the time that the wise men showed up. Why? Because, again, he was paranoid. He was a maniac. So he wanted to make sure if they had missed it by a margin, he wanted to give a margin and make sure he killed enough to assure that the king that would maybe be his rival would be killed. And so I believe that's the reason for the 2-year window of killing the babies. And so the word for where the baby was not a stable. It was not a cave. It was the word oikos, which is the Greek word for house. Yes, a house. And so Mary and Joseph were in a house with a toddler, and probably somewhere between a year to 18 months old. And the Magi, I believe, were from Persia. Now, I believe that simply because of the time that it would have taken them to have gotten there, but also because of the religion and the astrology that was associated with the Persians, and because from the days of Cyrus, the Jews had lived and had told the stories of the promise of a coming Savior, a Messiah, a King, an anointed one, because remember the days of Esther, that were only 500 years before this time, less than 500 years. And Ezra, the great scribe and priest who gave the Torah portions and brought revival and renewal back to the study of the Word of God. And then Nehemiah and Malachi, all of those men lived during that Persian period, and that lasted all the way down to 333 and the rise of Alexander the Great and the conquering of the Persian Empire. So Judaism was established in the Persian Empire, so they would have known of the Holy Scriptures. And so they would have known of the prophecies. But not only that, but it's interesting that the Church of the Nativity is still the oldest church. It was built during the Byzantine period that is still with us today on the same site that we know where it was built. Now, for those of you who know something of church history and the history of the last 2,000 years, the Church of the Nativity was built during the days of Constantine and Helena, his mother. And you may know the story of how she came to the Holy Land and searched out these holy places. But it was there where the Church of the Nativity was built over the caves where we believe that Jesus was born. And that church was, the foundation was actually laid around 325, but the building got underway in a massive way from 330 to 339 when it was dedicated. This is an old church. It was destroyed, by the way, in the 6th century in the 520s at a Samaritan revolt. It was burned, but it was rebuilt, and it is still part of the church that is there today. Parts of it date all the way back to the original. And on the columns of this church, you can still see today some of the ancient paintings that were painted on the walls and on the great columns as you enter into the church. Now, it's fascinating that during the Muslim period, when the Muslims came from what is Saudi Arabia today, they destroyed all of the churches that were in the environs of what is Israel today, except the Church of the Nativity. And most historians believe that know anything about that time, that the reason they spared the Church of the Nativity is because the drawings that were and the paintings that were on those columns were of the wise men, of the Magoi, of the Magi, look like Persians, because that is the tradition that had been passed down all the way from the first century, that these were Persians who came, and so they were painted in Persian dress. And so when they saw that on those poles, the Muslims, and by then it had already gone into Mesopotamia, that is the religion of Islam, which included Persia. And so they did not want to destroy a church that had as what would have been sacred figures to them, and so they did not destroy the Church of the Nativity. And that has been a very special church down through the years. Now, we don't worship places and churches. We worship the God of the places. But there's some places that are sacred. And it was in those same caves underneath that church that I believe not only was Jesus born, but I believe also, if history is accurate, that is where Jerome translated the scriptures into Latin, into common Latin. As a matter of fact, it was called Vulgate or Vulgar, the common language of the people, so that it could be read. And so there is some history with this as to the Magi. When you see these people dressed up and for great pomp and circumstance in the Christmas plays and in the writings, there's a reason for that. And that is the Gospel of Matthew talks about these who came from the east. Now, I've taken a lot of time for this because I know that many of you are startled by what I just said because it's the first time you've ever heard it. For those of you who have heard me and perhaps others teach about this, you already know that. But many pastors that I talk to have yet to understand this, and I'm just wanting to help you to understand. I'm not trying to turn over your apple cart or disturb you, but we need to go back to the Scriptures and study the Scriptures. Yes, tradition can help us, and all traditions are not bad, so don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. And some traditions are just legends and myth, but others are based on historical circumstances and historical time periods and things that happen and events that are handed down not in the Bible, which is infallible and inerrant, but through legend and through traditions. And so we need to examine those. But the Bible is clear that where Mary and Joseph were when the wise men came was a different place to where the shepherds came. All to say that the wise men came to worship a king. And this is only recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. Why? Because it is the gospel of the king and the kingdom. And that's why you have all the parables in Matthew 13 is a long series of parables of the kingdom. But there are other parables having to do with the king and his authority in the kingdom and the universe. Why? Because he is the Messiah, the Son of God, the King of Kings, and the Lord of Lords.
Thanks for listening to On the Way Classroom with Dr. Tony Crisp. Tune in each weekday for more information on how to read, study, and understand the Bible. If you have questions, please write to questions@tonycrisp.org. That's questions@tonycrisp.org. Questions@tonycrisp.org. Thanks for listening and have a blessed day on the way.